Tonight, we are focusing on gluing up a tabletop. And this is something that I don't think about that much anymore, but it is something that comes up, and it's important to a lot of folks. And this could be applied not just to gluing up a tabletop, but to any panel, like on the side of a chest of drawers or something like that. So some of the considerations, like when I'm out getting the materials for a tabletop, my number one consideration is find the widest, longest boards I can possibly find. That's especially true if you're building a dining table, because one of the secrets to great finishing is having great material and great wood on the top. If it looks beautiful without the finish and you got it all from the same plank, it's going to be great when you get the finish on. So I always try to look for the widest, longest, and actually in some species the densest, the kind that really grew slowly. And you can tell that by how close the growth rings are on the end. So begin with good material. That's number one. I'm going to demonstrate, use for demonstration tonight, a small table. I'm actually preparing for an Experienced Woodworking 101 class that we have beginning this coming Monday. And today, if you're watching this sometime in the future, is July 6th, 2016. So we are, in that class, we make a shaker table with a drawer. And the top is 18 inches wide and 21 inches long to finish. So rather than me slinging around these long planks trying to show you a dining table, the same principles are true, whether it's a huge table or a small one. Just to begin, here's a couple boards that actually were sawn from the same plank, and they were in this kind of order here. I've got them chopped up a little bit. But just one of the very basic principles of gluing up boards is arranging the grains so that the glue joint is least visible. In the early parts of furniture making, like the 18th century, the vast majority of times, the sides of a chest and the top of a chest were not glued up at all. They were one plank. And that is such a beautiful look. If you can achieve that, forget this whole lesson. Get one plank if you can. But we're not so fortunate to have those wide planks, and handling them is challenging. So we've often got to glue up. So in making that joint, we have on any board, usually you have a choice. On the right, your right of this, you see this linear grain. That's where the growth rings are coming out onto the surface, and they create a line. It's getting where, if they're directly perpendicular to the surface, they call that quarter sawn, and you have a very linear plank. These are just starting to get there. In the middle here, you have these arcs here. You can see that's very common. You've all seen that on wood. That's the plane sawn area of the board. It's plane. It's sawn in the same plane as the growth rings, if you think of looking at the end view. Its signature element are these arcing figures, often called cathedral figure. That's pretty much the center. You know, when you look on the end of a board, you're going to see the growth rings centered on that arc. So in this case, it's like this. So out here, we've got our linear grain, and in here, we've got our flat or plain sawn figures, so these wide bands. Now notice on this board how those wide bands are exiting the edge here. I don't know how well you can see it, but they're going out like that. Now, when you have a board like that and you're trying to create a glue joint, this is almost never the edge you want in a glue joint. I will, almost every case, that will be either the front or back edge of the table, because it's very hard to hide the joint. And it looks, your eye goes to it, it's almost, it's it's just unappealing to see that kind of clash in the grain on the top. So if I was to hold this up to this board here, you can see how the board on the right from the same plank has this nice linear grain here, and then we have that arcing plane sawn figure diving in. That is a very undesirable joint. A much better would be to put this linear grain here aligned with the linear grain on the side. I don't know if you picked that up, but when that glue joint is made, it's very hard to detect the glue joint in this case. So simply, the principle here is if at all possible, you want to try to hide the glue joint in the quarter sawn or the linear figure of the plank. All right. Now I want to show you a few other issues that you'll come up with and that you'll need to think about in gluing things up. These, can you see down on the table if I put this down like this? No, it's not. Can't see it. I'll hold it out. I can see. I think it reflects the light too much. Okay, I'm going to hold it like this, no problem. All right, so this board was just like this together. And you can see that grain is sloping and right up in an angular way. Now, down here, we have the plane sawn, these wide bands here. And up here, we have more of the linear rift or quarter sawn figure. So, when I've cut the board here, how am I going to join them together? Well, I could do this thing, and you know that's not going to work. If we come around with the plane sawn, that's actually not too bad. We've got a pretty good joint, but even the wide bands, you're still more able to detect a glue joint in a wide area like that. And with the wide bands, I can see how there's a lot of dark right here. But in the other case, we can bring that board around, and there we are. With the linear grain lining up, we've got a much better joint. So this is, I don't even know what the word is for this, but I call it the same edge glue joint, or swinging the board around to match along the same edge. So when a board's cut, I could match along this edge, or I could match along this edge. Now, for a little terminology, if we just made that cut and we glued these up, and I just slip this one aside like that, that would be a slip joint. And that's advantageous in some cases because for a couple reasons. If you're hand planing this board, you're more likely that the grain will be going the same direction in this center area when you're hand planing if you use the slip joint. The other reason is for the way the board will look when the finish is on. Like some woods are more common with this than others, but you'll get, if this board the grain was running up, and on this one it's running down to the surface, the way they're going to reflect light is very different. Light gets absorbed into the end grain, and it looks very dark. So, light is more reflected when it's coming up behind the piece. It's reflected. It's not looking into the end grain. So you've seen that when you've walked around the table, or maybe you've wondered why a glue joint has shown up so much when you put the finish on later. And you see how hard the line looks, even though you did a good job matching. You have to take note of the way the grain is running on the edge when you're making a glue joint as well. So that's another factor. The slip joint is more likely to give you favorable grain direction than the side joint where you just come around and glue it up. So that's one area. Sometimes you'll have two pieces that are like this, where you've got a bright spot, a bright white down one side, and more of the heart of the wood here. This is a piece of poplar. The heart is kind of green, and the edge is white. That's the wood we have up here in New England. We use it a lot for drawer sides, drawer bottoms, secondary wood, typically, meaning that it's used on the interior but not the primary surfaces of the piece. So how am I going to match this up? Well, this white band is kind of strong. So if I did a slip joint in this case and came over here, that doesn't match very well. It's a very hard line. I can see that white line right in the joint. So that's not working too well. But if I do the side joint and I just swing it around, that's really good. I mean, that would make a really nice joint, and we'd have that streak of sapwood, the whiter streak down the middle, as kind of a feature. And that's no problem. Or we could go and swing around the other side and have all heart down the middle, which would be pretty nice too. So this is definitely not a candidate for a slip joint, but pretty nice piece, and this will be one of the drawer bottoms in our 101 class. So I want to get to with those thoughts in mind, I want to get to our board for tonight that I'm actually going to glue up and show you. This is a piece of cherry. Can you see this? Should I come forward more? You got to get down onto it. I don't know if you can see the figure. I'll hold it up. Okay. I can see the glare a little. This is how this piece of cherry was assembled just a little bit ago before I cut it. These three boards will make one of the tops to our end tables for our class. And I made the cut there. And you can see with the chalk, I made these little arcs to say that's the edge I envision this swinging around and gluing up on. I have a number 1 here and the 2. So when I bring this down, I'm going to swing this one around. And there you've got that really nice linear grain right there. That's a sweet joint. And then I'll swing this board around and we'll get another edge that has some nice linear figure in it. So that will make a really nice glue joint. And it'll be very hard to detect that. It won't be disturbing at all. For anyone who knows wood and sees 3 cathedral-type figures on there, they'll obviously understand there's 3 boards there. But it won't be obvious that there's glue joints. So it will have a harmonious, complete feeling to it. All right, so this is how I'm going to glue this one up. And once I've arranged them and I like it, I usually just make a mark on it with a V shape. That way I can never get confused and lose my orientation on this. So that's what I'm going to do here. And now to create the good glue joint edge, I will go to the joiner. I could do it old school and hand plane it, but I think most people are going to use a joiner, and that's what we're going to do for this demo. So I'm going to draw the direction here. If I had this is mostly just for you to see the way I'm going to feed these through. I put these arrows on. I'm going to feed them through the joiner all in the same direction. So this first one will go up against the fence right here, will be against the fence, and I'll joint that edge. Then going in the same direction, this face will be up against the fence, and I'll joint that edge, and then I'll joint the other edge. So you get the idea. Everything is up against the fence in this direction. Now, I'm going to show you what happens when you do it this way to joint the work, how nice it is to facilitate a nice flat glue up. So let's go to the joiner. Okay, I've got my boards here, and I'm about to joint them, and I will use, this is my fence for the joiner, and I'll put it against the fence, and I've got it set lightly. I don't need to take off a lot. It's already pretty straight, so I'm just going to take a nice light cut. Now, here's the thing. What if my fence was sloped? What if it wasn't dead square? Now, I'm a seasoned professional, so it is dead square right now, I guarantee you. No, just kidding. Oftentimes, I do work with one that's not out of square. I may have not checked it. It may have gotten knocked out, but it's not square. So what happens? Well, you can still get a dead flat glue up with a fence that's not in square. And that has to do with those directional arrows that I talked about earlier. Let's just imagine this fence is laid over at, I don't know, 5, 10 degrees for exaggeration. So it's over like this. So when I joint and flatten the bottom, I'm going to actually be creating a sloping kind of cut down here, like that white line. It's going to be sloping. So I'd run that through, and I'd end up having that sloping cut. Then I would take the one next to it, and this time, I'm going the same direction again, but this board, the back or underside is against the fence. So again, it's going to be tilted like this, and I'll be making that sloping cut again. So I'll have that sloping line, and I'll run that through. Now, look what happens. When I come and bring these boards together, if you look at the ends, when they come together, those lines are parallel. They align. So even if your fence is slightly off, when you clamp these up, any angle that it's off will cancel out when you clamp it up, and you'll be left with a nice, true, flat top. So that's why it's important to run them all in the direction of the match. All right? So I'm going to go ahead and run these right now. Get my safety gear on. Here we go. Take it back to the bench. Okay, so here we are. We've got our top, and I go ahead and assemble it, and is that the way? No. The arrow, of course, has to be reassembled, so I need to flip this one over here, and there I am. That's great. Those joints look really nice. Now, I'm ready to glue up. Sometimes people ask me, do you use biscuits when you glue up? Do you use biscuits on your straight grain? And the answer is yes and no. This is such a nice straight glue up. This grain is very even, and the surface is beautiful. If I put glue on there, I know I'm going to get a very nice connection. And glue, the bond of glue is stronger than the wood fibers to themselves. So if you have a good surface connection there, then you're going to have a joint that is super strong and really doesn't require a biscuit. But I'm going to show you one side. I'll do one side with the biscuits just to let you know. Now, biscuits aren't just for the added strength to the glue joint, but they are helpful in aligning when you're gluing up. So sometimes if you have a glue up where alignment is a challenge or an issue, by all means, throw in some biscuits. I have a simple biscuit tool here, and it's when you plunge with it, the cutter in the deepest position that I have right here makes a 2 3/4 inch wide slot. So I want to anticipate that, and let's just say I'll put some biscuits in this one here, and I'll leave them out of the other one. I should say, one of the reasons I use biscuits for strength is when for some reason I have to make a glue joint where the grain is a little bit wild. It doesn't look like, it's not this straight, true connection. If the grain's wild, you have some almost like end grain coming into the joint. And end grain is like straws, and it sucks the glue away from the joint, and you don't have as much material in contact with the joint. So if there are any stresses on that table over time, it's most likely to fail right where you have those kind of, that wild grain. I've seen it happen on one table in my whole time. I've never had a top fail, except for one that I had in my own possession. And it hadn't been finished yet, but it slipped, and that's exactly what it was. It was just wild figure. So it wasn't a very wise glue up on my part. So I want to show you with the biscuits, to put those in, you have to be careful that you bring them in far enough from the end, because sometimes if you get them too close to the end, when you go to square your board, you'll have a nice surprise. You'll see Mr. Biscuit showing up right in the end grain and say, that's an interesting figure. And then it will dawn on you that that's the football coming out to show its face. So you have to keep track of where you're putting them so they don't show up unexpectedly later. On a little table like this, I've left it oversized by 1 inch in length. So to be safe, I'm going to come in from the end 3 inches to the center of these biscuits. So I'll just come in, make a little mark, and wow, I couldn't even see the glue joint because it's such a good match with this material. Now come down the other end, come in 3, make a nice mark, and there we have it. Okay, so now to put the biscuit in, all I do is, I like to use it straight on the table rather than the top. Sometimes you do use it, but I find that it works really well just flat on the table. So I hold pressure down, good positive pressure on the table, and I'm going to go ahead and plunge it. Hit the other end. I'll get this one. And the final. All right. So let me just clean those little slots out. That's nice. Hi, we got a question? Do you ever do a spring joint for glue ups? I don't typically worry about that. If I was short on clamps, I would, because the nice thing about a spring joint is you can clamp just in the middle and you get the pressure out on the ends. But with modern machinery like this, you can get such a true straight edge with the joiner that there's no need to go to that added difficulty. To do that, I would basically use a hand plane. There have been times when I've done it, but I can't remember the last time that I've had to use a spring joint. That's a good question. Who asked that question? Who? Ed, thank you for that question. All right, so now I've got my slots all set, and I'm going to test the biscuits. Before you get glue going, make sure they're fitting smoothly. Sometimes they can be a little bit oversized, in which case I will just scuff them on a piece of sandpaper like that, and usually they're fine. But it is like a little tenon in the edge, so it's kind of nice to use them. It's reassuring. By all means, if you love using them, use them. But a good glue joint, it's not really required. Okay, so I know that one's fitting, and I'm all set. Let's just double check with my other. Oh yeah, that's going to be great. Okay, so let's separate that, and I'll get ready now with the clamps. So I'm going to use my old standbys. These are Jurgensen eyebeam bar clamps. They are so strong. I mean, they put out super pressure. Not really necessary to have that much pressure, but they are really reassuring in making these kind of glue-ups. And I like the way I just use them in this manner. They're square on the bottom, so they make an elevated table for you to rest the pieces on. So I like to go ahead and put the top right on top of the bars, get everything spaced correctly and positioned well. Bring these in a little. Now one thing, I'm working with an oversized top, so these edges are going to get cleaned off, so I'm not worried about bruising the edge. If I was working with a finished table and this was a finished edge right here, I would put some kind of pad in there, a strip of wood or something, so I wouldn't damage that edge. Now, the way I glue it up is I just tip up the surfaces that are going to be glued. I only have to glue one side of the joint, so I just bring those two up. Now I'm ready to glue up. I'm going to use Type Bond 3, which is a nice waterproof glue, and it gives you more open time. Like Type Bond 2 and Type Bond 1, they grab faster. They set, or what's the word I'm trying to think of? They bond and what? Dry. No. Someone knows out there. Anyway, you get a longer time to work with this glue before it grabs. So sometimes you want it fast, sometimes, in this case, I'm going to use this, and it is the strongest of the Type Bonds too, as well as being waterproof. So here we go. I'm going to put the glue on. I usually just go with 2 beads down the length of the board. Not too heavy. I don't want too much squeeze out. So I have one up a little high, one down a little more. The only thing I don't like about using biscuits is that because they're in there, you can't use a rub fit, where I'll show you how to use a rub fit on this one that doesn't have the biscuits. Put down one bead, then another. Now, you could smear this around with your finger or a brush. I've never thought it was worth it, especially if you're going to rub fit, because you're going to smear it. It's going to be fully coated, believe me. In this case, where you can't rub fit, it's not a bad idea to brush it out a little bit. So, just want to make sure I'm going to get really good coverage here with the biscuits not allowing me to give it the old rub fit. So I got it out to the edges. There we go. Nice. Now, let's go ahead and get our little bit of glue on the biscuit. I didn't get a heck of a lot in there. There we go. And set it right in. And then set the other biscuit. I saw a funny video, a woodworking joke. Some guy was talking about, this time I'm going to glue it up with biscuits. And they show the video, and he's gluing it up, and he stops, and he takes a bite out of a big, fluffy, white biscuit. But I'm not that creative, my humor. Anyway, I'm going to put a little glue in this other biscuit slot and set it down, and now we can make the connection. So I just want to slide it right in there, align it with the lines that I established. There we go. That's coming up nice. Now, my other joint that has, I haven't brushed it out, I haven't put any biscuits, I'm going to give that the old rub fit. So I put it on there. Now I just go back and forth. And this is great because you can feel it getting slower and slower, and you get like this hydraulic, almost suction. And see that nice even squeeze out? It's the same on the bottom. So you've got a really great coverage there. And now I'll bring it in, and I'm going to start on this end. So I'm going to just give it some pressure here. This one cannot be adjusted because the biscuit's in there. The one on the nearest me, I'm holding it in plane. That's where the biscuits are really handy. They do give you a nice alignment. Okay, now I'm going to work my way across. I'm going to use one of these K-clamps, loaned to me by my friend Mike. Thanks, Mike. If I can figure out how they work. These fancy highfalutin clamps. You know, I'm going to bring that right in and adjust this one so that I'm flush in the middle. So if you don't use the biscuits, you kind of adjust by moving up and down on the end like that. Okay, I've got that. And now the final joint. Hold it nice and flat. If you hold it down on these Jorgensen I-beams, and you can do the same on this kind of K-clamp, you'd bring it all the way in, resting on the beam. These would just be upside down. You'll get a good solid alignment. So I'm going to check, make sure they're laying flat, and they are. So I know this is a really sweet bond. Now, some people like to leave the glue and scrape it off later with a paint scraper, and I've done that. It really illustrates when you do that how strong the glue is, because one of the negatives of that to me is when you pull it, the little pearls of glue, they actually tear up fibers of the wood with it. So I'm a fan of getting the glue off. Now, you can let it stay on there for a little while, and it will start to get a little rubbery if you catch it, like in about 10 minutes, 15, maybe 20, depends how warm it is. And it's easier to peel off with I just like to use a little putty knife, a nice flexible one. You can come along and you'll peel it off. Now, in this case, we're not going to wait. Sometimes if you wait, you get involved in something, you forget, and then you got to clean it off the old paint scraper way, which has its limitations. I got to fix this end of the joint. It's creeped up a little bit while I wasn't looking. There. Okay, so I'm going to now just come along and I'll get rid of this glue with my putty knife. There we go. That's most of it. I could, I'm going to wring this rag out really well. I don't want to soak it. That joint's up tight, but I don't want to let water get down into the joint. So I've got just a damp rag, but not a soaking one. This is just getting that surface glue off. Now I'm going to still surface these boards. I'm going to run them through my sander. So I'm not that concerned about the glue. But if I wet this, maybe we can get a better look at how nicely matched these boards look and what this top's going to look like. Even though it's 3 boards. I'll take this one off for a second so you can see. Even though it's 3 boards, look at Hey, welcome back. I'm going to go ahead and remove those as well. You can see it's even starting to tack up a little already. And when this is just the right consistency, after about 10, 15 minutes, these will just come popping off, and it's really an easier cleanup than when it's wet. Now these bar clamps, they are steel, so with the water and the glue, they leave a little black stain, which in this case, I will scrape on the bottom here just around that area, and these will get sanded heavily enough where that'll be gone, so I'm not worried about it. Prevents the black from getting onto the wood. All right, so I have a question. Say that again? Who? Yeah, I didn't mention anything about clamp pressure. Who asked that question? Who? Kelly? That's a great question, Kelly. Asked, is too much clamp pressure, will that starve the joint, and does it cause the panel to bow? Yes, it can. It certainly can cause the panel to bow. That's why we like to put our clamps on in opposite directions. If this were an I-beam, I'd lay it right flat on there. Now, when you snug your clamps up, you don't want to crush them so hard, because it is true that you are squeezing the glue out of the joint. You do want a tight joint. Just firm pressure is good. You don't need to overkill it, because when you don't, it'd be hard to starve the joint totally to lose it, but there is that risk. So that is a factor and a good question, good consideration. So get adequate glue, just a nice snug fit till you see that. Pull up nice and tight, and that's enough. You don't have to be Hercules on these clamps, but that'll do it. Any other questions? Thank you for that. Thank you all very much for tuning in. This is one of the great, often overlooked lessons of woodworking. So I really appreciate you spending some time with me here in the shop. And I do want to mention, before you go, we've got an upcoming live stream that I've had a number of requests. This was one of the first tables that I taught over at the nearby Shaker Village in a little class. It was in 1998, and such a great project for beginners. I don't often think of this. Our 101 class is similar to this table, but there's also a drawer, which is kind of advanced beginner. So it's intimidating to a lot of people to start in that case. So this would be a great place to start if you know anyone who's just getting into woodworking. I'm going to talk about a lot of the fundamentals of beginning in woodworking. And we'll actually have a discussion about the top, just like we did there. This is a top very similar to what we just glued up. We'll get into mortise and tenon joinery, a nice tapering jig for the leg, how to hand plane beautifully and card scrape. And then I even added these little walnut pegs. So that's a fun addition to this piece. And of course, we'll talk about finishing and some really cool, interesting tricks of how you can create pocket holes, attractive custom pocket holes with just a straight chisel, the method I use on all my custom work. So I hope you'll tune in for that or let your friends know. The more people who are involved in this, the more I can produce. So thank you very much. It's a 4-day class, by the way, and that live stream is going to start on August 31st and go the 7th, 14th, and 21st. Is that a Tuesday or Wednesday? It's a Wednesday night at 7 p.m., and it'll be for an hour and a half each time, and that'll be 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right? And you want to go onto the website to sign up. Also, I will also mention this was another version of the table. The base was made in poplar, and so we used a milk paint. I will have a little discussion about milk paint as well for the class. That made it a little more country version. So you have the cherry on the top, and the milk paint complementing the bottom. And then we rubbed through to show the pegs in an old way. So I hope you join me for that. We have a question? All right, one more question. Who is this? Do I ever use cauls to align the panels? That was from Don and Kelly. Want to know that? I'm assuming by that you mean some kind of clamp pressure on the end. Yes, there are times when it helps to put a clamp. You can apply a bit of a clamp pressure here, or sometimes you can stretch a board across and clamp this way, which will help align them. In a small, simple project like this, where I can feel easily, I know from having done this, that it's not a difficult glue up, and I can just adjust as I work across the board and get it in plane enough, and then I'm going to dress it and really get it smooth. So in some cases, you may find that you're having difficulty aligning the boards, and you would find that out in the dry run. You should always do a practice dry run when you've got a glue up of any complexity coming up, so you know things are going to work well once you start flowing the glue. So I would use clamps on the end. Usually I'm using these hand screws, and I'd clamp the end just to help align. And there have been times where I've used, I'm trying to remember what this was. I've actually used an arched board to glue something on in the middle of a plank. But that's another lesson for another day. But I hope that answered your question about calls. And is that it? All right, thank you all again for joining me. I look forward to seeing you back here again in the shop sometime. Take care.